It's funny, we do this quite often and everything works perfect sometimes, and then you don't do anything different, but you have one technical issue. It's crazy. It's technology nowadays.
Always, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back to Alabama Care. Today we have Mrs. Laura Soper and Mr. Drew Johnson, and we are going to be talking about the Allison Wetherbee Memorial and Miss Allison Wetherbee. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over. Mrs. Soper, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Soper. I live in Peachtree City, Georgia, but I grew up in Camden, Alabama, and still have family in that area. And I've known Allison since I could remember kindergarten. We were classmates all the way through till we graduated high school.
And did you meet Allison? Was she kind of a neighbor, or was it more through the school that you got to meet her?
No, it was a school in kindergarten. I didn't know anyone before going to kindergarten.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you for being here with us today. Mr. Johnson, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Drew Johnson, live in Montgomery. I, like Laura, am a lifelong friend of Allison's. We all grew up together. I met Allison in preschool, and we grew up, went to school together in the small town of Camden. Still have family there myself, and get back often.
Well, thank you, sir, for being here as well. And if you would both give an introduction to Allison Wetherbee for anybody that's unfamiliar with her, and just kind of tell a little bit background about Allison.
Drew, you want to go first? You want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. Allison was born in 1970, and she was born with no arms and no legs. And it was due to a drug that her mom was prescribed for morning sickness, which was quickly taken off the market. It's a drug we haven't heard of. But of course, the town of Camden, being a small, close-knit community, were shocked, to say the least, and nobody really knew what Allison's future would be. The doctors at the hospital where she was born even suggested that the Weatherbees put her in some kind of home to raise her. But the Weatherbees didn't want to do that. They took her home and said, "We're just going to take her home and we're going to love her and raise her like we would our older daughter," because Allison has an older sister. So they took Allison home and raised her like she was anyone else. Of course, there had to be some accommodations for her in their home, make it wheelchair accessible and that sort of thing. But yes, she went to school with all of her able-bodied classmates, and she went on, she was just one of the group, one of the friend group. With a small town, everyone knows everyone, and we all support each other. And Allison, Drew, and I graduated high school with a class of 30 kids. And I think like 26 of us had been from first grade on together. Or maybe 23, I don't know, but 2/3 of the class had been together for 12 or 13, and Drew's case, 14 or 15 years together.
You really get to know people when you kind of grow up together in a small community like that. And there's a lot of benefit, like the community helps raise the kids and all the families know each other and kind of keep each other in check. So there's a few things there that I'd like to kind of talk about. You mentioned it was the morning sickness medication. I hear that sometimes where individuals and families are like, my doctor's saying this one thing, but I feel this other way. I know, my son or my daughter better. I know myself better. And that's troubling to hear, that there was medication on the market that was pulled off, very, very quickly after that. And the other thing you mentioned is meeting in school. We are doing a couple of broadcasts with the Board of Education coming up and some candidates on there. And one of the talking points that we're going to have is special education and integration in the schools. Now, from what I understand, in Camden, the school system is fully integrated at that point, correct?
Yes.
And if you could speak a little bit about the importance of that for both Allison and for the rest of the class.
I think having grown up with Allison, seeing someone in a wheelchair outside of our small town, it wasn't as surprising, or it wasn't as much of a curious thing. I think that being exposed to, other kids. There was also another girl in our grade that was with us for a couple of years that was in a wheelchair. It just made us comfortable around people with differences, whether they're in a wheelchair or, Down syndrome or whatever. Being exposed and integrated with kids of all abilities and disabilities, I really think that it helped us to be more accepting and more just, I don't know, open-minded.
Right. I agree, Laura, 100%. At our church, I work with preschoolers, and before every new year, our preschool director, not every year, but will come to me and say, okay, well, this year we have a child coming on board with this disability. And I'm like, okay, no problem. She'll ask if is that going to be a problem for you? And I'm like, no, this is kind of what we grew up with, and we're used to it.
Hmm. I think that's really important, and I've heard similar stories. We have United Ability here in Birmingham, where they have a very integrated, like pre-K kind of system. But you'll see that in families where maybe a sibling has a disability, the others grow up to be very aware and very open armed to the disability community. I think it's very important for to have that integrated classrooms, especially at an early age, because I think a lot of time the disability community feels like people push back, and I feel like that's a little bit of awareness. They're just not familiar with the situation or the individual, and they don't know how to react. Just as someone, when you come into contact with something for the first time, you may step back a little bit at first. So to have that contact and that camaraderie at a young age, I think is really important. Um, Now, we also hear that in the work environment too. We have a couple employers here in Alabama that really tout that they hire individuals with disabilities. And what they say is that individual grows within the corporation, but also if it's a storefront, the storefront grows more as a family rather than a business. That the whole atmosphere of that business or that classroom really changes as that acceptance for the individual comes about there. So, okay, let's get back into Allison's story here. So you guys met early on in school. What are some stories through, let's say, K to 12 of you guys and Allison, some of her accomplishments growing in a small town?
I can talk about some
Yeah.
early memories of Allison. She references in her book, and my memories from preschool. Uh, when Allison was young, she had a walker, and I don't remember if it was pink or white, but it was two metal legs with a bucket seat on top, and she was able to move her body around and move those legs and get around. And it was a really big source of independence for her to be able to move around. I remember by the time we got to kindergarten, um, she was no longer in those legs, and I didn't understand why for a long time. But then in her book, she addresses that she had gotten bigger, and the balance just didn't work anymore. And I know that was probably very hard for her to lose that independence. But those are some of the early memories I have of Allison, and just how we all loved being around her in preschool. When it was story time, they would let Allison sit with some member of the class, and I was, I guess, on the back end of things, and you would look, and if Allison wasn't sitting with you, you were jealous. And I remember how special I felt when it was my turn, and I was looking around, saying, ah, ha, ha, it's my turn, and it was just always a treat when she got to sit with you at story time.
Yeah, I remember one time, probably third grade, maybe, we were probably 7, 8 years old, and I went over to Allison's house to play because my house was not wheelchair accessible. So I would always go over to her house where it was easier for her. And I walked in, and she is rolling down their long hallway. And I'm like, what are you doing? And because I had never seen her doing that. And she goes, Mama said I had to exercise. She said, I've been sitting around too much. So her mom had her rolling, just rolling down the hallway and back for exercise. And I just thought, oh, okay. That it was just, okay, that's how she's exercising. And I had a swimming pool at my house. And so I would invite Allison over to swim because we didn't have to go inside the house, which was, we had stairs and stuff. And Allison would have a life jacket on. Of course, she didn't have arms to keep it in place, but she had a life jacket on, and she would get me or whoever else to throw her into the pool, and she would just bob up, and she would just be laughing and having the best time. And then, I would get in the pool and I would, hold her so she wasn't unsteady, or she would just float on her back, and she just loved it. And that was, my birthday was in August. And so every year I'd have a swimming party and Allison would come over. And I've got a picture from, I think, like second grade. And all the girls are lined up sitting on the diving board, and Allison's right there in the row. So that's always a fun memory.
Yeah. And Mr. Johnson, you mentioned something about the independence there when she first had those legs and then later in the chair. I think that's a big thing that a lot of people don't realize. And it comes up kind of in travel and transportation, is the independence that a chair can give somebody that needs it. There's a lot of things that happen at the airlines where you can't take your chair with you on the airplane, so they give you a different chair. But what they don't understand is every chair is very different. That would be like putting on a new set of legs for somebody that's able-bodied. But to have that independence there opens up a world of things. I have a family member. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, and too, Allison had an attendant up through sixth grade, and by the time we reached seventh grade, she had gotten a wheelchair, an electric wheelchair that she could operate herself. And so then the independence kind of came back in. She could go wherever she wanted to. And in seventh grade, she went up through 12th unattended, and we were able to help her with her needs. But I know that meant a lot to her as well as when she got the electric wheelchair.
Yeah, that's very important. You mentioned she was independent there really after seventh grade, building those independent living skills. And we'll talk a little bit more about, her independent living skills and her want to live on her own in her own place, those kinds of things. Mrs. Soper, you mentioned just the fun that everybody was having in the pool and those kinds of things. I've heard stories before where parents get very surprised and they kind of have limiting beliefs for their children. They're being a little bit overprotective. They're like, oh, my son or my daughter can't do that or doesn't want to do that. And then they get out there on the playground or whatever environment it is, and they are just having the time of their life with their friends, doing things that their parents never would have thought, they were capable of doing. And hearing that story about the pool time reminds me of that. But I also believe somewhere in the background there, Allison's parents were probably pretty nervous about some of the stuff you kids are doing.
Well, I've got one more story that her parents love to tell this story now, but at the time, I think they were pretty taken aback. So Allison would have babysitters every now and then when her parents were out of town or whatever. And I think that she would convince the babysitters to do things with her that maybe her mom wouldn't want her to do. And one of the stories they like to tell is when she was, probably 5, 6 years old, she convinced the babysitter to put her in like a little red wagon and push her down this big hill that was in front of their house. And she convinced the babysitter to do this. And as she goes, flying down the hill, the wagon, loses control of itself or whatever and flips over, and Allison goes into the bushes. And the babysitter's like, oh no, and goes, running down there. Are you okay? Are you okay? And she sees these bushes shaking. And she's like, Allison, are you okay? And it was Allison laughing because she loved it. She was a daredevil, and she, much to her mother's chagrin, Allison was getting babysitters to do things that, maybe her parents wouldn't approve of. And, as an adult, she had a friend that she got to take her on the back of a motorcycle. And the friend rigged up this, it was almost like an egg, like a milk crate or something. I don't know what it was, so that she could sit down in it. And then they strapped her in, like bungeed her in to the motorcycle to go ride, because, there was nothing that she was afraid to do or try, or, yeah. And I really admired that.
I'm
Especially
afraid
not
to
being
get on
able
the
to
back of
hold
a motorcycle.
on. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, she couldn't hold on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the hills that Laura is talking about is, and for what it's worth, Allison grew up on a street called Rolling Hills Drive, so we're not talking small hills here.
So quite the daredevil. I'm nervous to get on the back of a motorcycle. I mean, there are cars everywhere there. Even if you're a great motorcycle driver, it's the other car that gets you. But even at 5, I mean, going down in that wagon, those things are not very sturdy, and they only have like that one little driver thing. You got to pull it back into the wagon. But if you get off by a little bit, that thing flips right over. So,
Exactly. That's what happened. But she
you
loved
need that.
it. She loved
I'm,
it.
I'm sure the babysitter didn't like it after the fact. She's like, "How am I going to tell your
Right.
parents what happened?"
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so it sounds like she had a very fun upbringing and very supportive family, very supportive friends in the community. From what I've read, I mean, I think that's a good foundation for everything in life to have that experience in your youth. But she really took that on after the K to 12 system as well, going to college, getting her master's, getting full-time employment, being involved in the community level, all the way to things that she enjoyed, like painting, those types of things. So if we could talk a little bit chronologically about her transition out of the traditional school system and into, I believe it was Auburn, correct?
Auburn
Auburn
University,
University at
Montgomery.
Montgomery. Okay, perfect. Now, did you guys keep contact with her at that point through college?
I did, yes. And
And
I
did
would
she
stop.
ever?
I was just going to say that her house was right off of the interstate. And when I was at Auburn University in Auburn, her house was right along the way. So I would stop by every now and then and just say hey to her.
Mm-hmm. And what was kind of her? Do you remember her passion at that point? Getting out of high school, what she wanted to do as we get older, or what job she wanted to do?
Right. So she
Sure.
she mentions in her book that her her older sister went away to college, and that's what she was going to do, and went off to college, lived independently with the assistance of attendants only, and then moved off to Russellville and worked as a mental health counselor and lived independently there with only the assistance of attendants. And she talks about being able to have her own mortgage and support herself. It's really, really, really cool.
Yeah, that book we are going to put in the chat. It really focuses on and this what we're talking about, Miss Wetherbee today, and her life is a testament to independent living and individualized services. We hear that a lot in the community, whether it's through waivers or plans, that a lot of these services are meant to be individualized, how the individual wants to receive them in their own home. And we're going through a big progression right now. We used to have institutions 20 years ago, and we've made a lot of headway since then. We still have a little bit of work to do, but right now we're really trying to get those individualized services, independent living in your own home, in your own community, that type of thing. And Allison's life is kind of a testament to, if you get it right and you can advocate for yourself and the system works, that you can have a great life and do everything that you want. You can do everything that you want, not at the same time, but you can do everything that you want in life. So let's talk a little bit more. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Sober.
Oh, I was just going to say that Allison, she knew her limitations. She knew what she could and could not do physically. And she thought about all of the potential jobs that she could possibly do. And that's how she picked mental health counseling, because she was like, okay, I'm a good listener. I can listen. I can help people. And so that was kind of what led her down that path
Mm.
of the mental health counseling. And of course, I think that was the perfect profession for her because she was very caring and loving, compassionate person.
Hmm. And I think it's important to start sometimes at, what do you want to do, but what do you not want to do? I don't want to be on a basketball court. There's no way that I'm going to be happy out there trying to play basketball or, on a football field at this age. But starting from what you want to do and where you're best fit to do it, I think is a good starting point there when you're maybe in high school and you're thinking about, it always comes down like ninth grade. What do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. I'm 14 years old. Um, Take this test and we'll figure it out. Like, no, it's a trial and error thing. You got to grow into it. But kind of having that stone and that rock to go in, and this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm going to be happy doing long term. So she went to Auburn University in Montgomery, and then after that, let's talk about some of her employment history, and then some of the things she enjoyed doing a little bit later in life. So
Drew,
we
you want to
mentioned that
take it?
we mentioned that she worked in mental health there as a therapist, counselor. How long was she there?
I don't know, maybe 10 years, Laura?
Yeah, she was
I,
up in the Shoals area. I think it was 10 or 11 years at the
yeah,
same place, at the same mental health
right,
center.
Hmm.
right, and
And then
and
you
and
mentioned,
worked there as a mental health counselor, and then went to work at Camp Asca in Tallapoosa County, which is Alabama's special camp for children and adults, and became the public relations director. Went around the state raising awareness for Camp Asca, which she loved and attended as a child, and just raised awareness and continued in that job until her death in 2016.
numerous things about Camp Asca. I have not been there on the actual land, but I probably 10 times in just normal conversation, I've heard people say, oh, you got to check out Camp Asca. It is the best place. Those types of things. McCartney, as I mentioned, is one of our anchors. She's 19. She continually talks about Camp Asca. She's had the director on to do a broadcast with her. So I have to make it a point to go out there at one of these points during camp and do a broadcast from camp because I keep hearing all these wonderful things that Camp Ask is all about, and I haven't seen it with my own eyes yet.
Yeah, Camp Asca was huge for Allison growing up. When she was, I think it was about 6 years old, well, she wanted to go to Girl Scout camp because she was in our Girl Scout troop, Brownies, and it was not wheelchair accessible. It just was not possible for her to go to Girl Scout camp. So um, the Weatherbees found out about Camp Asca at that point, and Allison was gung ho, and of course she's like 6 years old, and she had never been away from home, and she went off for 2 weeks, her very first time, completely, bye mom, didn't even look back, and she just fell in love with camp, and every summer she would go for longer and longer until, by middle school, she was pretty much going the entire summer. And then in high school, even some of the winter sessions, she would go over Christmas for a couple weeks. So, she just built up more and more time at camp. She loved it. And it really helped foster her independence, her confidence. I can't say enough wonderful things about Camp Asca.
Right, we would hear so much about it. Allison had her little world. She had the Camden world and she had the Camp Asca world, and she would come home and back to Camden and tell us so much about Camp Asca, and you could just tell how important and special it was to her.
I bet you guys felt a little jealous.
We did. We would always wonder who are all these people she keeps telling us about, and absolutely were. Yes, you nailed it.
Did you notice that? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Miss Sober.
I was just going to say that one of her counselors, Donette Dunnigan, and now she's Donette Mullenix, and I hope she's watching this. I heard so much about Donette Dunnigan all through elementary school and never met her. And then finally, when Allison was inducted into the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame in March, Donette came, and I'm like, I finally get to meet you. You know, I felt like I was meeting a celebrity.
Like Santa Claus at that point, you hear all these, great stories and you have yet to meet the individual. Um,
Exactly.
did you notice that there was a big difference in Allison and her confidence after the first time that she went to Camp Aska?
I was so young, I don't really remember. I'm sure it
Yeah.
did. But you know, when you're 6 years old, you don't pick up on things like that.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd love
But
to. Go ahead.
at the same time, by the time we were going through our teenage years, I think it helped her a lot maturity wise, and she was just on a different level from us by the time we were seniors and all that. And you could tell then that confidence wise, it helped her significantly.
So at the end of school, when you guys are seniors, she seemed to be a little bit more mature, maybe in her mid 20s in her thinking process there. Or how do you mean by that?
Well, it just she was going through the process of graduating high school with us in Camden, but you could tell that she just absolutely loved Camp Aska, and that's where she wanted to be. That was where she
Mhm.
found her true happiness and independence.
I've spoken with individuals, and some of what I kind of hear is those challenges that they have in growing up. They make it more difficult than their peers, but those difficulties have helped them gain more confidence, more skills, more navigation. Um, and that carries on through their life. And it can be tough when you're young, but as you overcome those challenges, I think a lot of individuals say that they are a little bit more confident at that age when that transition happens. So stick in there. I'd like to talk a little bit about. So Allison lived a great life. She did exactly what she wanted to do, and she passed away in 2016. And at that point, you guys got together. And how did the Allison Wetherbee Memorial come about? If you could take us through that process.
Well, I think that after the shock of her passing kind of wore off a little bit, you know, I just knew I wanted to do something to honor her in Camden. Just and I talked to Drew about it, and I'm like, Drew, I really think we should do something. And Drew and I, you know, like for class reunions and stuff, Drew and I were always the ones that were planning those and kind of took on that role in our class. Because remember, this is a class of 30 kids. And so Drew and I just started brainstorming what can we do that will have be a lasting memorial for her or, you know, a tribute to her. And after coming up with a lot of different ideas, we ended up partnering with Black Belt Treasures Cultural Arts Center in Camden to paint a mural on the side of the building where her parents and grandparents ran a department store for decades. And so we started raising money through Facebook donations, and we had a mural painted in her memory. So that's where it all started, and it's kind
Mhm.
of continued since then.
And that was started in 2016 or in 2017?
Uh, Probably 2017. What do you think, Drew?
Yeah, that sounds more accurate. It took us a while to kind of find our direction and what would work best.
Yeah, it can be a little bit tough, I imagine, of how do you honor this individual? How would they like to be honored? How do we continue to tell her story? And coming from Camden, where you said the class size is about 30 people, I'm sure most people in town knew Allison, even after she moved, whether she would come back and visit, with her family. Her family, it sounds like, was very in the community, had a hardware store there for a number of years. So I'm sure that everybody knows Allison is getting behind this memorial. And it probably loves driving by the building and seeing the mural out there. every time they go by.
Yeah, that's the benefit of the small community, the small towns. We all know everyone, and there's a lot of support, encouragement, and love there.
Now, through this memorial, and we're going to put the Facebook page in the chat. We also put it out in our weekly email. But you guys also are selling some art that Allison has done.
Yes. Well, the mural, Drew and I were very concerned about raising money for the mural. But when we put it on Facebook, we needed about, I don't know, $8,000 or so to have the mural painted and that sort of thing. And within 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, we had raised over $13,000. And so Drew and I were like, wow, this is amazing. And we did the mural, and then it kind of morphed into, okay, we've got this extra money. We're going to keep some for maintenance of the mural so that it can stay nice, through the years. But we've got some extra. And so we set up a scholarship fund that was kind of an offshoot, a continuation, if you will, of her memorial. And so we awarded scholarships to a senior from each of the 2 high schools in town, not just the one that Allison graduated from, but there are 2 high schools. So a senior from each school. And we did that for a couple of years. And then Drew and I were like, okay, we need some way to replenish some of this money so we can continue the scholarship. And after brainstorming, we decided, hey, she was an artist. Let's see if we can find more pieces of her art. I went over to her parents' house and we were digging in closets and old chests, and I found some amazing artwork. And we've been able to make different things using the artwork. So it's not just prints of her art. It's a whole array, anything from magnets to tea towels, all kinds of things we've been using and selling to continue the scholarship fund.
Now, someone may say, Allison, you mentioned, was born without legs and arms, correct?
Correct.
How did Allison paint? And if you could just describe this a little bit. I know you sent us a video, and I know that that's going to be part of the Instagram stories because I was asked that question this weekend. So I know we'll get to see some of that. But if you could describe Allison when she was painting.
She painted with her mouth. She learned at a young age how to write with her mouth, and talks about either in her blog or on her book. I don't remember how challenging it was at first, but she got it down. She was able to take notes in school, writing with her mouth, and was quite the artist. Painting with her mouth. She put the brush in her mouth and dip for the paints and all that. It's incredible.
Yeah, and some of the artwork that I found at her parents' house, she would paint or use pen and ink or colored pencils or whatever on scraps of paper and the backs of greeting cards. It was like whatever she could reach, because she wouldn't go to her mom and say, hey, can you get all this set up for me? She would just do it. So whatever paper she could find, she would paint or draw. And I found that interesting because it kind of goes to, her independent nature. She wasn't going to bother anyone else with draw or doodle or whatever. She would just go and find whatever scrap of paper. So one of the paintings that's my favorite, I mean, it's probably about a 3-inch by 5-inch piece of paper. And the detail is incredible. How she was able to do that so accurately, holding a paintbrush in her mouth or markers, I'm not sure which it was. It's incredible. She was very talented.
Yeah.
That is something I do not have. Okay.
Yeah, the
Sorry.
what Laura was talking about too, some of the doodles on the back of notebook paper or whatever. I think maybe she was doing those during college class or something. But they were quite interesting, and well detailed, like Laura said.
I do not have an eye for painting for art. I have seen some of the art that Allison has done on the Facebook Memorial page, and I was just like, I could never do that. I just my brain doesn't think that way. I couldn't create that. But I imagine when she has a source of inspiration and true artist, you just have to get it out. And she's like, this piece of paper here right now. I'm gonna, we have this idea, this painting
Exactly.
or this drawing, and I have to get it out right now. So I'm going to grab this piece of paper and get this out and give this to the world there. And a lot of those paintings that you guys have been able to reproduce, they are great for home decor, office decor, really wherever you spend time around, your home office or whether you spend it with other individuals. I highly recommend getting it, supporting the Allison Wetherbee Memorial, supporting Allison's life, and giving back to this scholarship. Now, speaking of scholarships, you guys are continuing to do this every year.
Yes, now that we have a new income source, so to speak, we will pick that back up for next year. And one of the things that was important to us with the scholarships is not just awarding it to someone with good grades or a bunch of achievements on their high school resume. The one of the I'd say the key component is an essay that they have to
Mhm.
write. And on the application that we give to the high school counselors to give out to people, there's like an excerpt from her book that they read, and they are to write an essay describing a hardship in their life that they have overcome and what that meant to them. And it doesn't have to be a physical, uh, hardship or limitation. And it's been fascinating to read the the applications that we've gotten, and we think that's important because resilience was basically Allison's middle name. That it's on her mural. It's one of her quotes. I am strong. I am resilient. I was born this way, and so were you. So that's kind of the theme, so to speak, of the scholarship awards.
I love that you guys have an excerpt from the book for the students applying. So they can get to know Allison a little bit more if they're not familiar with her life and her story, and give some background about where this money is, why this money is here, and where it's coming from, and celebrating Allison's life. Um, I hate essays, but I love that you guys are asking for an essay. Now you mentioned that Allison is in the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame. I was not familiar about the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame until we met over the internet, but it didn't happen all at once. Is that correct? It took a little bit of a process there.
Yeah. So it's interesting how this whole process has come along. Laura and I started with just a way to honor our friend with a mural, but then we're getting word out to people in the news media, and it just so turns out that when we were doing the mural unveiling, one of the reporters for the Montgomery Advertiser, Alvin Ben, uh, who had who had covered Allison at previous stages in her life and was familiar with her story, reached out to Laura and me at the end of the interview and said, "Hey, I think she would be a great candidate for the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame. Have you ever thought about that?" And Laura and I really weren't familiar with it either. And we started looking into it. And where Laura and I thought we were kind of at the end of our journey, we just realized it was just continuing. And we started reading at the criteria for admission. And we knew that we had to continue, that Allison was a slam dunk candidate. And we put a package together and worked with the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame to ensure that we were doing things the right way. We got letters of recommendation from not only the community of Camden, from Camp Asca, people who knew her from Russellville and the Shoals area, um, and put all that together. And I think we went through a couple of iterations of applications, and then here we are in 2022, and she's in.
That's awesome. And for anybody that's unfamiliar, what exactly is the Alabama Women's Hall of Fame? And are there some other notable members that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah,
Right. So it was founded
absolutely.
in
Yeah, go
1970,
ahead.
and to recognize women from across the state who have had major accomplishments. It was housed at Judson College in Marion for from 1970 until just recently. College closed, and it's been moved to University of West Alabama in Livingston. And some of the notable members are Coretta Scott King, Catherine Tucker Wyndham, um, Allison Wetherbee. Uh, just
Helen Keller.
yes, of course.
Helen Keller.
Mhm. Lots of
So she sits among the greats there.
absolutely, and absolutely deserves to be there.
That's amazing that you guys, I mean, are such good friends with Allison throughout her life. You've had big connections, but you continue to, I don't want to say advocate, but to remember her and, as the community, you don't hear about that happening much, even with family members when they pass away. What was the main driving force behind wanting to continue her message?
Well, Alex, she was so positive in every aspect of her life, and she had a very strong faith in God. She was an inspiration, not because, or not only because of her accomplishments, what she was able to do despite her limitations, but she was an inspiration emotionally and spiritually, and just an all around amazing person, irregardless of the disabilities, that she was able to overcome. I mean, like her Facebook post, she would post a lot on Facebook, and every post was something inspirational or that made you smile. It might make you laugh. Everything was positive. One of the things I learned when I was gathering information for the application for the Women's Hall of Fame packet, I learned that Allison would go each week. She went for years. She would go to like AA meetings or Al-Anon meetings to support the people there. She wasn't an addict. She didn't need to go to those meetings, but she wanted to, and she formed friendships, and she was supporting these people in their journey of their own hardships. And one ended up needing a liver transplant, and she spearheaded a fundraiser for this person that she was, had befriended through that. I mean, just I could go on and on with
Yeah, that's
the
something that
wonderful
I didn't know.
stories. Yeah, yeah, she did. She spearheaded the fundraiser. I think it was one of those motorcycle rides, where I don't know, I don't know what they're called, chip rides or something. But
Mhm.
yeah, she did that to raise money for this man who needed a liver transplant that she had met at, through the AA. Just things like that. She was an amazing person in and of itself. And the fact that she overcame all of the physical limitations she had and did those things, it's just like it compounds it. It makes her even more special. And I'm so grateful when after she started working at Camp Asca, I took my kids specifically to Camp Asca for one day, because I was like, okay, kids, this is when they were little, elementary and middle school. And I said, we are going to Camp Asca to meet my friend Allison because I want you to meet her. and Allison gave us the tour of camp. You know, she was the kind of person you wanted other people to meet and to know, and to be inspired. And so that's kind of the driving force behind continuing her legacy.
Yeah, and the way that I wish I would have met Allison. I didn't move to the state until 2016, but just hearing you both talk about Allison, um, there are people that you meet very few throughout your life, but when you do, and they're that bright star and that source, you feel very grateful to for whatever time period they're in your life to be a part of their life and to see who they are in that light. Um, so I can understand wanting to honor her and who she was to the community, to the state, to our friends, um, in general. So, now, I would like to ask a little bit about what would you say to some friends or community members that have a peer with a disability, and how to better support them, make them feel very welcomed, um, appreciated, part of the group. Some things that you both learned growing up and making Allison, feel very at home in her own community.
I would say don't assume that the person with the disability can't do something. Um, because usually there's a way if there's something you want to do, whether it's go to the movies or I mean, Allison wanted to roller skate. We put her on a skateboard at the skating rink when we were there, so like she was going around on the skating rink on we're pushing her on the skateboard, so don't assume that they can't do something.
Mr.
Right.
Johnson, is
That
there
I
anything?
agree. Yeah. Just don't settle for what you see on the surface. Everybody, maybe, I don't know, the people with disabilities want to have hopes and dreams too, and don't make assumptions about them. Just love on them, support them, encourage them for whatever it is they want to do.
Love on them. I like that. Love on them a little bit. And be creative. Have fun there. That reminds me of a story. I have a family member. She's 57 and she has an intellectual disability, and she functions kind of at a child level. And she'd never been out on the ice. I do a little bit of hockey, ice hockey. And I decided about 3 years ago, before the pandemic, that I was going to take my aunt ice skating, and she's in a wheelchair. And so we put her wheelchair out on the ice, and I skated behind her, and that thing was like a skating rink back in my middle school. All the lights, and just a bunch of kids out there, and she's just looking around, loving it. And I was like, "You've never been on ice before. You're not sure what's going on here, but you are thoroughly enjoying this." And she had that experience later on in life. I think you just have to get creative. If your friends want to do something, be inclusive. We'll figure out a way to do it. It's no big deal. Let's go. Love on you a little bit.
Find a way. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Um, as we kind of come to a close today, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would really like to drive home for individuals that have a disability, their friends in the community, or maybe some of the family that are supporting them?
There's a quote that one of the things that we've been doing, not just with Allison's artwork, but also Drew and I went through her book and her blog post, her Facebook post, and we picked out some of the most meaningful quotes. And we've been using that also in addition to her artwork for some of the things that we're selling for fundraising. And there's one quote in particular that we've used a lot, and I think it's just an important life lesson for all of us. And this quote is directly quoted from Allison: "We are to use what we have been given rather than dwell on what we do not have." And I think you can apply that to any and all aspects of our lives. I think that's a very important takeaway. Um, and I just wanted to share that with everyone.
And that's straight from Allison's book.
Yep.
Right. And one of the things she says too, in addition to what some of the things we used on our mural, was to use your talents and find joy and love in everything you do to navigate your life.
She seems like a very positive person from both of those quotes. It's kind of think about what's possible, think about what you can do about it, and then go do it and have fun doing it.
Always.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, I'm unfamiliar with a lot of Alabama still. How far is Camden from McCalla, Alabama, or Birmingham?
It's about 120 miles south. So Camden is in between Selma and Monroeville. So it's about 40 miles south of Selma, about 70 miles southwest of Montgomery,
Southwest.
in the middle of a bunch of pine trees in the Black Belt region.
My mother lives down in Mobile, so next time I go down there, I'm going to have to spend an extra maybe hour, 2 hours to swing by and see the mural and take a picture
Oh,
of it.
definitely. And go by Black Belt Treasures and
Absolutely.
see Allison's. There's a whole display of things that we've created using Allison's art and quotes at Black Belt Treasures. So definitely stop by. And there's a plaque in front of the mural that gives a summary of Allison's life, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've seen the picture, but I feel like it doesn't do justice.
It doesn't.
Yeah. I go by every time I go home. I go over there and just stop and look at it and admire it.
Same. Yeah.
Well, I want to say thank you for both spending some time with us this morning and sharing Allison's story. As I mentioned, we're going to put in the chat the links, and I highly recommend you guys go check out the paintings, the inspirational quotes, buy the book, and get to know Allison and who she was to her community, to her family. And I'm sure there are a lot of things that we're benefiting from today because of her advocacy in the disability community that may go unspoken of. And I think that happens quite often. So it is nice, to see others being recognized. So I want to thank you guys once again. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and end the broadcast. We will give each of our little cameras a wave there, and then you guys can go ahead and exit out.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.